The Quiet Thinking Habits of Millionaires by Wealthy Mindset Audiobooks. Most financial mistakes are not caused by lack of intelligence, but by the inability to remain calm when it matters most. This audiobook explores why those who build lasting wealth rarely rush decisions, and how learning to think quietly, patiently, and deliberately can change not only how money grows, but how life feels along the way. Most people move through life with a quiet assumption humming in the background that wealth belongs to the fastest, the quickest thinker, the boldest mover, the one who reacts before doubt can creep in. We admire decisive voices, rapid success stories, overnight wins that seem to reward speed and confidence above all else. It feels logical, almost instinctive, to believe that money favors those who act first and hesitate last. And yet, if you pause long enough to really observe your own life or the lives of people around you, you may notice something unsettling. Beneath all that movement is a kind of exhaustion, a tiredness that no amount of effort seems to cure. You work harder, decide faster, chase opportunities with more urgency than ever before, yet the sense of security you're aiming for always seems just out of reach. The pace increases, but the peace does not. This is where the quiet pain begins to form. Urgency becomes a constant companion. Every financial choice feels like a test you must pass quickly. Every opportunity feels time-bound, fragile, fleeting. Miss it now, and it's gone forever. Or so it seems. Decisions stop feeling thoughtful and start feeling rushed, as though life itself is tapping its foot, waiting impatiently for you to choose. There's a subtle anxiety that comes with this way of living. You may not always notice it, but it shows up in small ways. A knot in your stomach before making a purchase, a restless urge to check prices, news, markets, or messages. A lingering fear that slowing down means falling behind. And quietly, almost invisibly, this fear shapes how you think about money, time, and even your own worth. At some point, a question begins to whisper its way into your awareness. If speed is supposed to bring progress, why does it so often leave us anxious? Why does moving faster rarely bring the calm we expected to find on the other side? The promise of urgency is clarity, but the experience is often confusion. The promise is confidence, but the result is second-guessing. We are taught early, and often, that hesitation is weakness, that pausing means doubt, that waiting is the enemy of success. Yet many of the moments we regret most are not the ones where we waited too long, but the ones where we acted too quickly. Impulsive decisions may feel powerful in the moment, but over time, they quietly erode confidence. Each rushed choice leaves behind a trace of uncertainty, a sense that we were reacting rather than choosing. As Seneca once observed, no person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have. There is a calm wisdom in that idea, a reminder that much of our urgency is not driven by necessity, but by desire, amplified by fear. Fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear that if we slow down, the world will move on without us. Somewhere beneath all this noise, beneath the notifications, the deadlines, the comparisons, the pressure to keep up, there is an unspoken truth waiting patiently. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compete for attention. It simply waits for you to be quiet enough to notice it. This truth suggests that many of our financial struggles are not the result of ignorance or lack of effort, but of a mindset trained to react rather than reflect. You may have seen this truth in fleeting moments. Perhaps when you delayed a decision and later felt relieved you did, or when you stepped back from an opportunity that felt exciting but unstable, only to realize months later that walking away saved you stress, money, or regret. These moments are easy to dismiss, but they carry an important signal. James Clear once wrote, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." Speed is not a system. Urgency is not a strategy. They are emotional responses, not thoughtful frameworks. And when they dominate our financial lives, they shape systems built on reaction rather than intention. What if the habit we avoid most, the habit of slowing down, is not a flaw but a strength? What if patience is not passivity but precision? The kind of precision that allows you to see risks clearly, to understand trade-offs fully, and to make decisions that serve not just the present moment, but your future self. This idea can feel uncomfortable at first. Slowing down in a fast world feels almost rebellious. It can trigger fear, self-doubt, even guilt. But discomfort is often the doorway to growth. And in this case, it may be the doorway to a different relationship with money, one built on clarity rather than chaos. The people who quietly build lasting wealth are rarely in a hurry, not because they lack ambition, but because they understand something essential. Time is not something to outrun, but something to work with. They have learned that the calmest decisions often carry the greatest weight, and that silence, when used well, can be more powerful than speed. As we move forward, we will explore this quiet truth together, not as a rule to follow, but as a lens to see through. Because sometimes, the most meaningful changes do not begin with action, but with awareness. And perhaps the first step toward a more secure, grounded financial life is not learning how to move faster, but learning how to pause without fear. The world has a deep admiration for decisiveness. We praise people who act quickly, who speak with certainty, who move without visible doubt. In stories of success, action is framed as virtue and hesitation as weakness. What we rarely talk about, however, is the emotional cost of living this way. Constant reaction takes a toll. It quietly trains the mind to stay alert, defensive, and rushed, even when nothing is truly at risk. Over time, this posture creates fatigue, not just physical tiredness, but a subtle erosion of clarity and calm. Many people grow up believing that wealth is built through intensity. More hours, more pressure, more urgency. The assumption is simple. If success hasn't arrived yet, it must be because we're not pushing hard enough. But this belief overlooks a quieter force that plays an equally important role: restraint. Restraint doesn't look impressive from the outside. It doesn't generate dramatic stories or instant results. Yet, in the long arc of life and finance, it often proves to be the difference between momentum that burns out and progress that endures. Imagine, for a moment, two travelers on a long journey. The first is in a hurry. He sprints toward every shortcut, constantly checking maps, changing direction, chasing whatever path looks fastest in the moment. He feels busy and alive, fueled by motion and adrenaline. The second traveler walks steadily. She pauses to observe the terrain, notices patterns, adjusts her pace without panic. Her journey looks calm, almost uneventful, as if nothing remarkable is happening at all. From the outside, the sprinter seems more committed. There is movement, urgency, visible effort. The steady walker appears slow, even passive. Yet as time passes, something interesting happens. The sprinter grows exhausted, frustrated by wrong turns and constant course corrections. The walker, though less dramatic, makes consistent progress. She avoids unnecessary detours, not because she is smarter, but because she is present enough to see what's actually happening around her. This is where many people get stuck, not because they lack effort, intelligence, or ambition, but because they confuse movement with meaning. Doing something feels productive, even when it's the wrong thing. Reacting feels powerful, even when it's driven by anxiety. In financial life especially, this confusion is costly. Buying, selling, switching strategies, chasing trends. These actions create the illusion of control while quietly undermining long-term stability. Urgency is particularly deceptive because it often disguises itself as ambition. It sounds like drive. It feels like determination. But if you listen closely, urgency is frequently rooted in fear. Fear of missing out, fear of falling behind, fear of not being enough yet. Morgan Housel once wrote, "The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving." Urgency keeps that goalpost in motion, always just a little farther away, always demanding more speed. When fear is in the driver's seat, decisions narrow. Perspective compresses. The future becomes less important than immediate relief. And so, even well-intentioned people find themselves making choices they later question. Not because the opportunity was bad, but because the timing was emotional. The decision was a reaction, not a reflection. To see clearly, something counterintuitive must happen. You have to step out of the rush. This doesn't mean abandoning action or ambition. It means creating space between stimulus and response. Space where emotion can settle and reason can speak. Space where you can ask not just, "Can I do this?" but "Should I do this now?" This stepping back often feels uncomfortable at first. Silence can feel like inaction. Waiting can feel like falling behind. But clarity rarely arrives at full speed. It emerges when the mind is no longer sprinting. As Napoleon Hill observed, patience, persistence, and perspiration make an unbeatable combination for success. Patience, in this sense, is not delay. It is discipline over impulse. When you slow down, you begin to notice things you couldn't see before. Patterns in your own behavior. Triggers that push you toward rushed decisions. The difference between opportunities that align with your long-term values and those that merely excite your short-term emotions. This awareness changes how you relate to money, time, and effort. Choices feel less dramatic. Outcomes feel less personal. And confidence grows, not from intensity, but from consistency. The foundational idea here is simple but profound. Wealth is not only built by what you do, but by what you resist doing. The restraint to pause, the restraint to wait, the restraint to let clarity catch up with emotion. In a world that rewards speed on the surface, the deeper rewards often go to those who are willing to move thoughtfully beneath it. As we continue, we'll explore how this quiet form of thinking shapes real decisions, real habits, and real results. For now, let this idea settle. Sometimes the most powerful progress begins not with another step forward, but with the courage to stop running long enough to see where you truly want to go. Quiet thinking rarely announces itself with grand gestures. It begins in moments so ordinary, they are easy to dismiss. A pause before replying to a message that stirs emotion. A night of sleep before saying yes to an opportunity that sounds exciting but unclear. A breath taken before spending money simply because it feels urgent. These moments do not look like progress from the outside, yet they quietly shape the direction of a life. Most people believe discipline shows up in dramatic acts of willpower. In reality, emotional discipline works in subtler ways. It is the ability to notice an impulse without immediately obeying it, It is the space between feeling and action. Over time, this space changes the nature of decisions themselves. Choices become less about reacting to the moment and more about aligning with something deeper and longer lasting. There is a small but powerful shift that happens when you realize reacting is optional. At first, this idea can feel uncomfortable. We are so used to immediacy that pausing feels like resistance. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mind begins to relax. You start to recognize that not every email requires an instant reply. Not every opportunity requires immediate commitment, and not every financial move demands urgency. This awareness doesn't slow life down. It steadies it. As patience takes root, it stops feeling like delay. Instead, it begins to feel like strength. The kind of strength that allows you to wait without anxiety, to observe without panic, to decide without pressure. Patience reframes time from an enemy into an ally. You begin to understand that clarity often arrives after emotion settles, not before. And when clarity arrives, it carries a quiet confidence with it. Uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable experiences for the human mind. We crave closure, certainty, and quick answers because they promise relief. Yet many financial mistakes are made not because people lacked information, but because they couldn't tolerate uncertainty long enough for wisdom to emerge. Quiet thinking trains the mind to sit with the unknown without rushing to fill the gap with action. This tolerance becomes a competitive advantage few recognize. Consider how often people commit to decisions simply to escape discomfort. An investment is made to quiet anxiety. A purchase is justified to soothe insecurity. A career move is rushed to avoid feeling stuck. In these moments, the decision is not serving the future. It is serving the present emotion. Quiet thinkers learn to recognize this pattern. They do not shame themselves for feeling it. They simply refuse to let it drive. Over time, something unexpected happens. Confidence grows, not because you are moving faster, but because you are judging more consistently. Each thoughtful decision reinforces trust in your own process. You begin to rely less on external signals and more on internal alignment. The noise of opinions, trends, and comparisons loses its grip because you are no longer borrowing certainty from the crowd. This consistency creates a stable foundation. When you act from intention rather than impulse, outcomes feel less dramatic. Wins do not inflate the ego, and losses do not crush it. You understand that decisions are part of a long arc, not isolated events demanding perfection. This perspective brings emotional resilience, which is just as important to wealth as financial knowledge. Wealth, when viewed through this lens, is no longer about quick accumulation. It becomes about durable decisions made repeatedly over time. Quiet thinking reveals that financial growth often looks boring in the short term. There are fewer thrilling stories, fewer urgent moves, fewer moments of adrenaline, but beneath that calm surface, something powerful is happening. Stability compounds, optionality increases, stress diminishes. James Clear once wrote that small habits, repeated daily, shape the trajectory of our lives. Quiet thinking is one of those habits. It does not transform everything at once, but it changes the direction ever so slightly. And over years, that slight change becomes significant. Decisions guided by patience tend to align with long-term values. Decisions guided by urgency tend to serve short-term emotions. As this way of thinking deepens, you begin to see wealth differently. It is no longer something to chase aggressively, but something to cultivate carefully. The focus shifts from proving worth to preserving clarity. Money becomes a tool rather than a test. Time becomes a resource rather than a threat. And progress feels steadier, less fragile, more grounded. This is where a deeper understanding of wealth begins to form, not as a destination marked by numbers, but as a byproduct of sound judgment applied consistently. Quiet thinking does not eliminate risk, but it helps you choose which risks are worth taking. It does not remove uncertainty, but it teaches you how to live with it gracefully. As we move forward, we will explore how this internal discipline shows up in real-world decisions and everyday habits. For now, allow this idea to settle. The most meaningful changes often begin not with dramatic action, but with a simple pause, a moment of stillness that gives wisdom time to arrive. At the heart of most financial decisions lies a quiet struggle that few people talk about openly. It is not a lack of knowledge, nor a shortage of opportunity, but an internal tug-of-war between fear and logic. You may recognize it instantly. The moment when your rational mind understands what should be done, yet another voice urges you to act now before it's too late. This tension does not announce itself dramatically. It feels subtle, persuasive, and often justified. And yet, it is where many long-term financial outcomes are quietly decided. The urge to act quickly carries a comforting promise. It suggests safety, control, relief. When uncertainty appears, action feels like armor. Doing something, anything, creates the illusion that you are steering the situation rather than being swept by it. But this promise is often misleading. Speed can reduce anxiety in the moment, yet undermine clarity over time. Decisions made to escape discomfort rarely age well because they were never meant to serve the future, only to calm the present. Most people already know what the rational choice looks like. They know when patience would be wiser than haste, when waiting would offer better information, when restraint would preserve options. And yet, knowing is not the same as doing. Under pressure, urgency becomes persuasive. It reframes hesitation as danger and waiting as weakness. So people move, not because the decision is right, but because standing still feels unbearable. The contradiction here is striking. The more pressure we feel to act, the less clearly we think. Stress narrows attention. Emotion compresses perspective. When the mind is flooded with urgency, it loses its ability to weigh trade-offs calmly. In those moments, we don't evaluate possibilities. We react to sensations. Fear, excitement, envy, and hope blur together, creating decisions that feel inevitable but are often avoidable. This dynamic is magnified by the world around us. Markets fluctuate by the minute. Headlines speak in absolutes. Opinions arrive constantly, each one confident, urgent, and emotionally charged. Social media turns other people's gains into personal benchmarks, making patience feel like falling behind. In this environment, even thoughtful individuals can find themselves pulled into decisions they later question, not because they lack discipline, but because the noise was relentless. Morgan Housel once observed that the most important part of every plan is planning out on your plan, not going according to plan. Quiet thinkers understand this deeply. They recognize that uncertainty is not a signal to rush, but a condition to navigate thoughtfully. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do right now?" they ask, "What would still make sense if things take longer than expected?" That subtle shift changes everything. Quiet thinkers do not eliminate emotion from decision-making. They simply refuse to let emotion dictate timing. They notice the tension rising, the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the impulse to act, and they pause. This pause is not passive. It is deliberate. It allows emotion to express itself without taking control. In that space, logic regains its voice. Think of someone watching waves from the shore. A reactive person runs toward the water at the height of each surge, responding to every movement. A quiet thinker steps back and watches the pattern. They notice that waves rise and fall, that intensity passes, that what feels urgent now often looks different moments later. Financial markets, trends, and opportunities behave the same way. The ability to observe without immediately acting is a form of strength. As Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Many financial decisions are attempts to preempt imagined pain. Selling too early to avoid loss, buying too quickly to avoid missing out, committing too soon to avoid uncertainty. Quiet thinking reduces this unnecessary suffering by allowing the future to unfold a little longer before demanding action. When emotion no longer sets the pace, decisions change character. They feel less dramatic, less personal. Wins do not inflate the ego, and setbacks do not threaten identity. You begin to see decisions as experiments rather than verdicts. This mindset creates resilience. It allows you to stay engaged without becoming entangled. There is also an unexpected freedom that comes with this approach. When you stop reacting to every signal, you regain control over your attention. You choose what deserves your energy and what does not. You learn that not every opinion requires consideration, not every trend deserves participation, and not every opportunity aligns with your goals. This discernment is rare and valuable, so the question remains, and it is worth sitting with. What happens when emotion no longer sets the pace? What becomes possible when urgency is replaced with intention? The answer is not instant wealth or perfect decisions. It is something quieter, but more durable. It is clarity. The kind that compounds over time. The kind that allows you to move through uncertainty without panic and through opportunity without haste. As we continue, we will explore how this shift from reaction to reflection reshapes not just financial outcomes, but the experience of building wealth itself. For now, let this thought linger. Sometimes the most powerful move is not forward or backward, but inward, toward the calm place where wise decisions are born. There is a powerful illusion that quietly shapes how many people think about success. It tells us that confident, successful individuals never hesitate, that they always know what to do, act without doubt, and move decisively while others overthink. From a distance, their actions appear smooth and certain, reinforcing the belief that speed is proof of mastery. But this image, while compelling, is incomplete and often misleading. In reality, hesitation and doubt are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awareness. People who have built something lasting are not free from uncertainty. They have simply learned how to coexist with it. They understand that clarity does not always arrive instantly, and that rushing a decision does not eliminate risk. It merely conceals it. What looks like confidence from the outside is often patience, quietly at work on the inside. Rushing, on the other hand, frequently masks insecurity rather than strength. When we feel unsure, action becomes a way to escape that feeling. Doing something feels better than sitting with uncertainty, even if the action itself is poorly timed. The decision is not about progress. It is about relief. And while that relief may be real in the moment, it is often short-lived. Regret has a quiet way of following urgency. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives later, in hindsight, when emotions have cooled and perspective has widened. You look back and realize that the decision wasn't wrong because the outcome was bad. It was wrong because it was rushed, because you acted before understanding the full picture, because urgency, not intention, was steering the wheel. Over time, this pattern creates emotional fatigue. Each reactive decision requires energy, not just to make, but to fix, justify, or recover from. One rushed move leads to another correction. One impulsive choice demands another adjustment. The mind stays busy, constantly managing the consequences of its own haste. Eventually, this cycle becomes exhausting, even if the results appear productive on the surface. Wealth pursued in this way feels fragile. It may grow quickly, but it lacks roots. It is easily shaken by market shifts, unexpected news, or changing circumstances. Because the foundation was built on reaction, not reflection, stability is always temporary. The next surprise threatens to undo what was built before, and beneath the surface, there is a constant vigilance, a sense that everything could unravel if attention slips for even a moment. This is why so many people who appear successful also feel restless. They are constantly monitoring, adjusting, reacting. They have momentum, but not peace, progress, but not issued with ease. And while the world may applaud their speed, their inner experience tells a different story. One marked by tension, pressure, and an unspoken fear of slowing down. Stillness offers a different path, though it rarely feels inviting at first. To someone accustomed to urgency, stillness can feel like stagnation, like vulnerability, like falling behind. But if you stay with it long enough, something unexpected happens. The nervous system settles. The mind begins to breathe. Thoughts slow, not because they are suppressed, but because they are no longer chased. In that stillness, relief emerges, not the fleeting relief of quick action, but the deeper relief of alignment. You begin to feel less pulled by every signal and more anchored in your own judgment. Decisions no longer demand immediate answers. They can wait, and in waiting, they often improve. Details surface. Emotions clarify. Options expand. It is in this quiet space that something meaningful begins to surface. You start to notice how many of your past decisions were shaped by the desire to avoid discomfort rather than to build something durable. You recognize patterns, moments when urgency disguised itself as ambition, or when fear dressed itself up as decisiveness. This awareness is not judgmental, it is liberating. James Clear once wrote that, "When you are stuck in motion, you don't get results." Stillness breaks that cycle. It allows motion to become intentional again. Instead of reacting to every opportunity, you begin to choose which ones deserve your energy. Instead of chasing every gain, you start protecting your capacity to think clearly. This shift does not mean withdrawing from opportunity or avoiding risk. It means approaching both with discernment. You learn that true confidence does not require constant movement. It rests in the ability to wait without anxiety, to pause without guilt, and to trust that clarity will arrive when given time. As stillness becomes more familiar, it transforms your relationship with money and success. Wealth stops feeling like something that must be defended at all costs. It becomes something that can be grown patiently, thoughtfully, and with less emotional strain. You begin to understand that the strongest foundations are often built quietly, away from urgency and applause. As we continue, we will explore how this calm, deliberate approach reshapes habits, decisions, and long-term outcomes. For now, allow this idea to settle gently. Sometimes the most meaningful progress begins not with another bold move, but with the courage to stand still long enough to hear what wisdom has been trying to say all along. Awareness does not arrive with an announcement. It slips in quietly, often after repetition has worn us down. It appears when you begin to notice patterns in your own behavior, especially the timing of your decisions. You start to see that it isn't just what you choose that matters, but when you choose it. Emotions, once invisible drivers, begin to reveal their influence. Fear accelerates. Excitement rushes. Anxiety demands resolution. And in that noticing, something important begins to change. The realization that follows is subtle, almost gentle. Not every opportunity deserves a response. This idea runs counter to much of what we are taught. We are conditioned to believe that opportunity knocks once, that hesitation is costly, that waiting is a gamble. But as awareness deepens, you begin to see how many opportunities are simply invitations to react rather than invitations to grow. Declining them does not close doors. It preserves energy and clarity for the doors that truly matter. When the mind steadies, decisions lose their drama. They stop feeling like verdicts on your intelligence or worth. Instead, they become deliberate steps within a longer journey. You are no longer rushing to prove that you are decisive. You are choosing to be thoughtful. This shift removes an enormous amount of pressure because it reframes decision-making as a process rather than a performance. Inner calm, once established, has a way of expressing itself outwardly. You may notice that conversations become easier. Financial choices feel cleaner. You sleep better after deciding, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the process was sound. This calm does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You act with intention rather than impulse, and that intention shows up in results that feel steadier and less fragile. Money, interestingly, responds differently to patience than it does to pressure. Under pressure, money becomes reactive. It is moved hastily, defended anxiously, chased aggressively. Under patience, money becomes cooperative. It has room to compound, to recover, to align with long-term plans. This is not a mystical idea, it is a practical one. Time rewards consistency far more reliably than it rewards urgency. There is an old observation, often attributed to Warren Buffett, that the stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. While simple, this insight points to a broader truth. In nearly every area of life, patience allows outcomes to mature. Pressure forces them to ripen prematurely. Awareness teaches you the difference, not through theory, but through lived experience. As this awareness grows, logic slowly regains its rightful place beside emotion. Emotion is not dismissed or silenced. It is contextualized. Fear is acknowledged, but not obeyed. Excitement is felt, but not trusted blindly. Logic is invited back into the conversation, not as a cold judge, but as a steady partner. Decisions become balanced rather than extreme, thoughtful rather than rushed. This balance changes how growth feels. It is no longer exhausting. Progress stops resembling a sprint fueled by adrenaline and becomes more like a steady walk fueled by purpose. You begin to sense that you can maintain this pace indefinitely. There is less burnout, less second-guessing, less emotional whiplash. Growth becomes something you live with, not something you chase. James Clear once noted that success is often about doing the same things longer than most people are willing to. That willingness is not about stubbornness. It is about sustainability. Awareness helps you see which habits, strategies, and decisions you can realistically maintain over years, not just weeks. It encourages you to build a life and financial path that does not require constant intensity to survive. Perhaps the most meaningful shift is internal. You stop measuring progress by how fast things are happening and start measuring it by how aligned things feel. You trust your timing more. You feel less threatened by other people's speed. Comparison loses its urgency because you are no longer racing anyone. You are walking your own terrain at a pace that allows you to notice where you are. Growth that feels sustainable carries a different emotional texture. It is quieter, less dramatic, but it is also more resilient. It can withstand uncertainty without panic and setbacks without collapse. It leaves room for rest, reflection, and recalibration. And over time, this kind of growth tends to outlast louder, faster approaches. As we move forward, we will explore how this steadiness reshapes not just decisions, but identity. How the way you think about money begins to influence how you think about yourself. For now, let this awareness settle. Notice your own timing. Notice when emotion tries to hurry you, and what happens when you do not let it. Often, that simple noticing is the beginning of a more sustainable, more peaceful form of progress. Wisdom has a way of revealing itself when we stop forcing answers. It rarely arrives in moments of frantic action or constant movement. More often, it emerges in restraint, in the decision not to act immediately, not to respond to every signal, not to fill every silence with effort. This kind of restraint can feel counterintuitive, especially in a world that equates motion with progress. Yet over time, those who practice it begin to notice something subtle but profound. Clarity tends to surface when urgency steps aside. For many people, external success and internal peace feel like opposing goals. One seems to demand sacrifice of the other. You chase results at the expense of calm, or you protect calm by avoiding ambition. But restraint changes this equation. When decisions are made thoughtfully rather than reactively, success stops feeling like a battle. It starts to align with peace. You may still work hard, still aim high, but the work feels less frantic, and the aiming feels less desperate. There is a quiet confidence that grows when your inner world is no longer at odds with your outer pursuits. You no longer feel the need to prove momentum through constant action. Instead, you trust that progress can be steady and still meaningful. This trust doesn't eliminate effort, it refines it. You invest energy where it matters, and you withhold it where it doesn't. Over time, this selective focus becomes one of your greatest strengths. Think of a river carving its way through stone. It does not rush. It does not strain. It simply flows day after day, year after year. The stone does not yield because the river is loud or forceful, but because it is consistent. In much the same way, steady thinking reshapes financial outcomes. Quiet decisions, repeated over time, alter the landscape of a life more reliably than dramatic moves ever could. This is why quiet progress often replaces loud effort for those who build lasting wealth. Loud effort demands attention. It seeks validation. It announces itself through hustle and urgency. Quiet progress, by contrast, is almost invisible while it's happening. There are fewer stories to tell, fewer moments to showcase. But beneath the surface, foundations are being laid. Systems are being strengthened. Optionality is being preserved. Letting go of urgency creates a surprising effect. Instead of closing doors, it opens them. When you are not rushing, you see more clearly. You notice alternatives you would have missed. You recognize when waiting improves the odds, when patience reveals better timing. Opportunities that once felt fleeting begin to feel abundant. You realize that many of the best ones don't disappear quickly. They wait for those who are ready. This paradox is difficult to grasp until it's experienced. We are taught that urgency creates opportunity, but often it only creates noise. By releasing the need to act immediately, you give yourself space to choose wisely. You stop chasing every possibility and start selecting the few that truly align with your long-term direction. In doing so, you conserve not just money, but mental and emotional energy. Wealth, built in this manner, begins to feel different. It feels stable rather than reactive. Instead of responding anxiously to every market shift or financial headline, you view fluctuations with perspective. You understand that volatility is part of the landscape, not a personal threat. Decisions are grounded in principles rather than emotions. This stability brings a sense of security that goes beyond numbers. It lives in the confidence that your approach is sound. With this stability comes calm, not the absence of challenge, but the absence of panic. You no longer feel chased by time or pressured by comparison. Your pace is your own. You measure progress not by how quickly things are happening, but by how consistently they align with your values. This calm does not dull ambition. It gives it endurance. There is also a quiet relief in realizing that you don't have to be constantly on guard. You don't have to monitor every development or react to every opinion. By trusting your process, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of constant vigilance. This freedom allows you to engage with life and money more fully, without fear dictating your moves. As this sense of calm deepens, reflection becomes natural. You begin to look back not with regret, but with understanding. You see how urgency once shaped your choices, and how restraint now reshapes them. This awareness is not heavy, it is gentle. It prepares you for deeper insights, for questions that go beyond tactics and strategies. At this stage, the journey turns inward. The external noise fades slightly, making room for quieter questions about purpose, balance, and meaning. You are no longer just building wealth, you are refining how you live alongside it. The calm you've cultivated becomes a foundation for reflection, a steady ground from which deeper wisdom can emerge. As we move into that next phase, carry this image with you. Progress does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it flows. And sometimes the most powerful transformation happens not when you push harder, but when you learn to let go, allowing steady thought and patient action to shape a future that feels both prosperous and peaceful. There comes a moment in this journey when the struggle that once felt overwhelming begins to look different. Urgency, which used to feel like a permanent condition, is now seen through a clearer lens. You recognize it not as an external force controlling your life, but as an internal habit that once shaped how you responded to uncertainty. This shift is subtle but powerful. What once felt unavoidable now feels understandable, even manageable. With that clarity, pressure loses much of its grip. Situations that once demanded immediate action now offer something else: choice. You realize that not deciding right away is still a decision, and often a wise one. This awareness restores a sense of agency that urgency had quietly taken away. Instead of feeling pushed by circumstances, you begin to feel grounded within them. At this stage, something important happens internally. Philosophy, emotion, and practicality begin to merge. Ideas that once felt abstract now show up in real decisions. Emotional awareness no longer feels separate from financial logic. It complements it. You understand that how you feel informs how you think, and how you think shapes what you build. This integration brings coherence to choices that once felt conflicted. Wealth, seen through this integrated lens, starts to change its meaning. It becomes less about proving something to yourself or to others, and more about preserving clarity. You no longer need money to validate worth or quiet insecurity. Instead, money becomes a support system for the life you want to live thoughtfully. The question shifts from, how fast can I grow this? To, how well does this serve my long-term peace? This shift is deeply liberating. When wealth is no longer tied to identity, decisions become lighter. You stop forcing outcomes to meet emotional needs. You give investments, careers, and plans the space to unfold naturally. This doesn't make you less ambitious. It makes your ambition healthier. It aligns growth with values rather than ego. One of the most surprising discoveries along this path is how patience compounds, not just financially, but emotionally and mentally as well. Each time you wait, instead of rushing, you strengthen trust in your own judgment. Each time you choose clarity over speed, you reduce future stress. These small acts accumulate quietly, creating a foundation that feels stable and resilient. James Clear once wrote that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Patience works the same way. It rarely produces dramatic results in the short term, but over time, its effects are undeniable. Decisions improve. Confidence deepens. Mistakes become less costly. You begin to see that patience is not passive. It is active, disciplined, and deeply practical. As patience takes root, simplicity begins to replace strain. You no longer feel the need to overcomplicate strategies or chase every possible angle. Complexity once felt like sophistication, but now it feels like friction. Simpler plans are easier to maintain, easier to understand, and easier to adjust. They allow you to stay engaged without becoming overwhelmed. This simplicity shows up everywhere, in how you manage money, in how you evaluate opportunities, in how you think about time. You begin to appreciate that the best systems are not the ones that demand constant attention, but the ones that quietly support you in the background. Life feels less like a constant negotiation and more like a steady rhythm. With strain reduced, reflection becomes natural. You find yourself looking back not with criticism, but with curiosity. You see how urgency once shaped your choices and how patience is reshaping them now. This reflection is not heavy or regretful. It is calm, even appreciative. You recognize that growth required going through that earlier phase, not avoiding it. Reflection also deepens understanding. You start to see patterns not just in your finances, but in your behavior. You notice what triggers urgency, what restores calm, and what conditions help you think clearly. This awareness becomes a guide, helping you anticipate challenges before they escalate. It allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react reflexively. At this point, the journey feels less about fixing something and more about maintaining balance. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are working with your tendencies, not against them. This harmony makes progress feel sustainable. You trust that you can continue this way without burning out or losing direction. Perhaps the most meaningful realization is this: clarity is not a destination you reach once and keep forever. It is a practice, a habit of returning to patience when urgency appears, a willingness to pause when pressure rises, a commitment to thinking clearly even when the world encourages haste. As this section closes, allow yourself to sit with that idea. The earlier struggle with urgency has not disappeared, but it no longer defines you. It has become a teacher rather than a tyrant. And from that understanding, a quieter, steadier form of progress begins to unfold. One where simplicity replaces strain, patience compounds gently, and reflection continues to guide the way forward. There comes a quiet moment in this journey when you begin to look back at your past with softer eyes. The anxieties that once felt sharp and overwhelming no longer carry the same weight. You remember the sleepless nights, the rushed decisions, the constant sense that time was slipping through your fingers. But now, instead of flinching at those memories, you observe them with compassion. You understand that fear was not a flaw. It was a signal from a younger version of you who was trying to protect something that mattered. In this gentler light, past mistakes begin to change shape. They are no longer heavy regrets that demand punishment or shame. They soften into lessons, imperfect, sometimes costly, but deeply human. You start to see that many of those decisions were made with the best awareness you had at the time. You were not careless. You were learning. And learning, by its very nature, often looks messy before it looks wise. There is a quiet relief in allowing yourself this understanding. Emotional healing does not come from replaying the past with harsher standards. It comes from recognizing context, from seeing how pressure, fear, and urgency narrowed your options, and how you did what you thought was necessary to survive that moment. Judgment tightens the wound. Understanding loosens it. And as understanding grows, the emotional charge attached to old memories begins to fade. Peace, slowly and almost unnoticed, starts to grow in that space. Not the dramatic peace promised by sudden success or perfect outcomes, but a steadier kind, a peace that comes from no longer being at war with your own history. Urgency, which once dictated your inner rhythm, begins to loosen its grip. You still care about progress, about growth, about building something meaningful, but the frantic edge is gone. You are no longer chasing relief. You are cultivating stability. With this shift, freedom begins to feel different. It no longer depends entirely on external milestones, numbers in an account, titles, or the approval of others. Freedom starts to feel internal. It shows up as the ability to pause without guilt, to wait without panic. You learn that not knowing everything does not mean being unsafe. It simply means being alive. This acceptance softens the mind and loosens the grip of anxiety. The pace of life begins to slow in response, not because your responsibilities disappear, but because your relationship with them changes. You no longer rush through moments to get to the next one. You allow yourself to be present where you are. Conversations deepen. Decisions feel less urgent. Even ordinary routines take on a quieter richness when they are no longer treated as obstacles to something better. This slowing has a meditative quality to it. You may notice longer pauses between thoughts, fewer mental rehearsals of the future, less replaying of the past. The mind, once crowded with noise, begins to feel spacious. This spaciousness is not empty, it is supportive. It gives your thoughts room to breathe and your emotions room to pass without resistance. Silence, which once may have felt uncomfortable, now feels like an ally. It no longer demands to be filled with distraction or productivity. Silence becomes a place of rest, not absence. In it, you hear yourself more clearly. You notice subtle cues, when something feels right, when it feels forced, when it's time to act, and when it's time to wait. This relationship with silence strengthens intuition without making it impulsive. As awareness deepens, your inner world becomes less reactive and more observant. You catch emotional shifts earlier. You recognize when urgency is creeping back in, not as an enemy, but as a signal to pause. Awareness does not eliminate old patterns, but it changes how you relate to them. You are no longer inside the storm. You are watching it pass. This level of awareness brings a quiet confidence. You trust yourself not because you are always right, but because you know how to respond when you are uncertain. You know how to slow down. You know how to reflect. You know how to choose again if needed. This flexibility is a form of strength that doesn't announce itself, but it holds everything together. At this point, the journey begins to feel less like striving and more like settling into alignment. You are no longer trying to become someone else. You are learning to live more fully as yourself. Financial decisions, personal goals, and daily choices begin to stem from the same internal compass. Life feels coherent rather than fragmented. Final wisdom does not arrive as a command or a rule. It approaches naturally, almost quietly, as if it has been waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You sense that the most important lessons were never about speed, status, or even money itself. They were about relationship, how you relate to time, to uncertainty, to effort, and to yourself. As this section comes to a close, there is no need to rush toward conclusions. Let the calm linger. Let the gratitude settle. You have learned that clarity grows in patience, that peace can exist without perfection, and that awareness deepens when life is allowed to move at a human pace. From this place, whatever comes next will arrive not through force, but through understanding. As this journey draws toward its close, one truth stands out with quiet clarity. Wealth, in its most enduring form, favors clarity over chaos. Not the clarity of perfect foresight, but the clarity that comes from thinking without panic. The clarity that emerges when decisions are not rushed, when emotions are acknowledged but not obeyed, and when time is allowed to do the work it has always done best. In a world addicted to speed, this kind of clarity feels almost radical. Quiet thinking, you've learned, is not avoidance. It is not hesitation born from fear or indecision disguised as wisdom. It is alignment. Alignment between intention and action, between values and behavior, between what you want now and what you want to protect later. Quiet thinking is the discipline of choosing your pace instead of inheriting the world's urgency. When emotion settles, truth becomes visible. This does not mean emotion disappears. It means it stops crowding the room. Fear no longer shouts over logic. Excitement no longer drowns out caution. You begin to see situations more as they are, not as they feel in the heat of the moment. And in that clearer light, better decisions naturally follow. The most surprising realization along this path is how simple it feels once it's understood. Not easy, but simple. You stop searching for complex strategies to outsmart uncertainty and start trusting a quieter approach. Pause, observe, decide with care. There is no grand formula hidden here, no secret reserved for a select few. The power was always in how you think, not how fast you move. Time, once feared, slowly becomes an ally. Earlier in life, time may have felt like a threat, something slipping away, something you had to race against. But now you see it differently. Time amplifies whatever it's given. It magnifies impatience into regret and patience into progress. When you work with time instead of against it, you allow compounding to become a partner rather than a miracle you hope for. This shift changes how decisions feel. They regain their proper weight. No longer inflated by pressure or stripped of importance by haste, decisions settle into their rightful place as thoughtful steps within a longer journey. You no longer demand perfection from them. You ask only that they be honest, considered, and aligned. That alone is enough to create momentum that lasts. True wealth begins to reveal itself here, not just in accounts or assets, but in steadiness, in the ability to move through volatility without panic, in the confidence that you don't need to react to everything to remain relevant, in the freedom to say no, to wait, to let things unfold. This wealth is quieter than the kind that seeks attention, but it is far more resilient. You may notice that people who build this kind of wealth rarely appear rushed. They are not detached from reality. They are deeply grounded in it. They understand that most outcomes are shaped not by dramatic moments, but by repeated, ordinary decisions made with care. They respect the compounding effect of small choices and steady habits, and they protect their clarity as fiercely as others protect their possessions. Perhaps the greatest reward of this approach is internal. The mind becomes a calmer place to live. You are no longer negotiating with urgency at every turn. You trust yourself more, not because you are always right, but because you know how to respond when you're unsure. You have learned to slow down without fear, to wait without guilt, and to move forward without forcing. This is where patience reveals its true power, not as passive waiting, but as active trust. Trust in your process. Trust in time. Trust that clarity, once prioritized, will continue to guide you. Patience does not delay success. It shapes it. It gives success a foundation strong enough to last. If there is one enduring lesson to carry forward, it is this: you do not need to outpace the world to build something meaningful. You need to outthink your impulses, outweight unnecessary pressure, and outgrow the belief that speed is synonymous with progress. The quiet path may not impress everyone, but it will serve you. As you step beyond this chapter, remember that clarity is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something you return to again and again. A choice you make when urgency rises. A habit you practice when fear appears. A commitment to thinking clearly, even when it would be easier to react. True wealth grows when patience leads, when decisions are shaped by alignment rather than anxiety, when time is treated as a collaborator, not an enemy, and when quiet thinking becomes not just a strategy, but a way of living. As we come to the end of this conversation, there is a quiet sense of gratitude worth acknowledging. Not gratitude for reaching a conclusion, but for the willingness you showed to pause along the way. In a world that constantly urges movement, choosing to reflect is an act of intention. It suggests that you value understanding over urgency and meaning over noise. That choice alone already sets something important in motion. The central lesson does not demand to be memorized or repeated. It lingers naturally, like a thought you return to without effort. Calm thinking compounds quietly, not overnight, not in dramatic leaps, but in steady, almost invisible ways. Each moment you choose patience over panic, clarity over reaction, you add another small deposit into a future that feels more grounded and less fragile. There is power in allowing a final breath of stillness to settle here. No need to rush toward application or action. Stillness is not wasted time. It is often where insight finishes forming. In these pauses, the mind integrates what it has heard, and the heart decides what it will keep. Sometimes the most meaningful change happens after the words end. As this journey closes, it does so softly, without instructions or demands. What remains is space. Space for thought, space for choice, space for your own rhythm to emerge. You will return to your life, your decisions, your responsibilities, but perhaps with a slightly different pace. And over time, that difference may matter more than you realize. Carry this gently with you, not as a rule, but as a reminder that clarity grows when you allow it time, that patience is not passive, and that true progress often begins the moment you stop rushing long enough to listen.